Hello, class. Uh, I've been getting a lot of questions about the midterm exam, and so I thought I'd just record a quick video to kind of go over the instructions and do a little bit of review and kind of explain my expectations. So hopefully this will help. Um, so here's the exam. Um, let's look at these directions. You can find this on Blackboard under the assignments as an MS Word or Microsoft Word document. Let's look at these directions. It says respond to 3 of the following 8 prompts in typewritten essay format worth up to 8 points each. Okay, so there are 8 prompts here. You should pick 3. Every semester I have a few students who don't read the directions carefully and respond to all 8 prompts. Please don't do that. If you do that, probably what I'll do is I'll just grade the first 3 and ignore the rest, unless I'm feeling generous, in which case maybe I'll read all 8 and grade your 3 best. But really, your time would be much better used focusing on doing a good job on the 3 prompts that you choose. Pick whichever 3 out of the 8 you want. I would say pick the ones that you are most interested in, have the most to say about, or feel the most comfortable with. But whatever choice you make, pick 3 of the 8 writing prompts and answer them in a typewritten essay. You're going to get a grade out of 25 points on this exam, which is 25% of your total grade in the class. What I'll do is I'll give you a grade out of 8 points for each of the 3 essays. So if it's like an A plus essay, I'll give you 8 points. If it's kind of a A minus B plus essay, I'll give you 7 points. If it's kind of a B minus C plus essay, I'll give you 6 points, and so on. And then I'll total those 3 grades to come up with a total grade out of 24 points, and I'll give you 1 free point for turning the assignment in on time, and that'll give you your total grade out of 25 points. So the exam is worth 25% of your grade. You have 3 required essays. Each of the 3 essays is worth 8% of your grade in the course. So that's my first piece of advice. Do make sure that you do 3 essays. Often I'll have students who do a very good job on 2 of the essays and fail to do the 3rd one and get a bad grade on the assignment. So make sure you do all 3 of them. The typewritten essay format here to me just means that you should respond to the prompts or answer the questions in complete, grammatically correct sentences, organized into paragraphs with topic sentences. Also, you should use like an academically appropriate format, something like MLA or APA or Chicago style. So you should use like a normal font, normal margins, proper spacing. So like a 12-point Times New Roman or Calibri, double spaced, 1-inch margins. You should include proper citations. So you should have a references page or bibliography or works cited page. You should have corresponding in-text citations. You should have a heading or a cover page or something like that. So, okay. The typewritten essay format here does not necessarily mean that you have to compose like a 5-paragraph essay with an introductory paragraph that includes a thesis statement and 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion that summarizes the results. Sometimes I'll have students do that. That's not really what I have in mind. Just really like answer the questions in complete sentences organized into paragraphs. Sometimes I'll have students do something even worse than that. They'll somehow try to construct one big massive essay that answers all the questions, and please don't do that. 3 individual 1 to 2 page essays where you respond to the prompts. Okay. No set length requirement, but good answers are usually about 250 to 500 words or 1 to 2 double-spaced pages each. And so you have to write 3 essays. Each of those should be 1 to 2 pages, and so your total exam should be sort of 3 to 6 pages. In my experience, I hate to give a length requirement. There's always a danger in this. When you tell students that they have to write 500 words, some percentage, a lot of students believe that the assignment is to write the necessary number of words. That's not the assignment. The assignment is to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of the material and your ability to think critically and independently about the material, not just to generate a certain number of words. And so whenever you tell a student you need to write 500 words, a certain number of students understand that to be the assignment. So they'll make one of two mistakes. They'll either write 300 words and not have anything else to say, and then add 200 words of unnecessary fluff that just makes for really awkward prose. So please don't feel the need to fluff out the word count if you haven't met the required number of words. Also, students will sometimes make the opposite mistake, which the assignment is to write 500 words, and they'll get to 500 words, and they won't really be done writing, they won't be done answering the question, and they'll just stop writing because they reach the word limit. So please don't feel constrained in that way. Write as many words as you need to answer the question. In some cases, maybe that's less than 250 words per question. And you're certainly free to go over 500 words per question if you want. But in my experience, the good answers usually kind of fall in that 1 to 2 page range. So if you're writing much less than 250 words per question, you're probably not writing enough to do a good job answering the question sufficiently. And if you're writing more than 500 words per question, you're probably doing more work than you need to get a good grade. And so my advice is write as many words as it takes to answer the question, but usually it's 1 to 2 pages per question. The other thing I'll say about that is, on average, the students who get the good grades are writing closer to 2 pages per question than 1 page per question. So at least 1 page for each question, maybe closer to 2 pages for each question. Okay. Let's see. This is a take-home exam, so you're welcome to use any resources available to you, but be sure to include proper citations if you do. So I guess I should say a word about plagiarism here. Don't plagiarize, don't cheat. So plagiarism is taking the words of somebody else and representing them as your own. You should not do that. For one thing, it's wrong. It's taking somebody else's work, which is stealing, which is wrong, and it's representing that work as your own, which is dishonest. It's lying, which is also wrong. And so plagiarism is stealing and lying, and stealing and lying are wrong. And this is an ethics class, and so you should try to be on your best behavior in here. Okay, so that's one thing. But the other thing is, if you plagiarize, you're actually cheating yourself out of the education that you paid for. Imagine that you hire an expensive personal trainer, and then you get a robot to run on the treadmill for you. You're paying a personal trainer for nothing. You're not getting any stronger. And it's the same thing with school. You're paying for an education. You're here to improve your verbal reasoning skills and your critical thinking skills. And if you don't do your work, you're not going to improve in that way. So that's another reason not to do it. You're cheating yourself out of your own education. Another reason not to plagiarize is because you're also cheating your classmates. It's unfair to your classmates who actually do their work. If you manage to cheat and get away with it, get the same grade they did, that's not fair to those of your classmates who actually do their work. Okay, so you're cheating your classmates, you're cheating yourself, you're lying, you're stealing, and so these are all very good reasons not to plagiarize. If you're not impressed by any of those reasons not to plagiarize, you also shouldn't plagiarize because if you get caught, you will get in trouble. So penalties for plagiarism can range from receiving a 0 on an assignment at the low end, which if I catch you plagiarizing is what's most likely to happen. But a 0 on this assignment would be a pretty severe penalty because it's 25% of your grade. And so if you took a 0 on this assignment, the highest grade you could possibly manage in this class would be a C, and that would be if you did a very good job on everything else, which if you're thinking about cheating, you probably wouldn't. So it could have a severe grade penalty. It could be worse than that. You could face an academic charge, in which case you'd have to go have a visit with the Vice President of Student Services, Dr. Harrell, which is kind of like going to the principal's office. It's going to not be a pleasant experience. And then you get an academic charge, and you get a warning, and maybe you get placed on academic probation. And then if you get caught doing it again, maybe you get kicked out of your program. And so a range of penalties you could suffer. Probably get a 0 on the assignment, maybe even worse than that. So even if you don't care about being a good person and doing the right thing and not cheating your classmates and yourself, you might still, out of just pure rational self-interest, want to avoid getting in trouble, which you could get in trouble if I catch you cheating. And if you are cheating, there's a good chance I'll catch you. I've read a lot of undergraduate essays, and I know what undergraduate essays usually sound like, and I know what plagiarism usually looks like. This is another reason not to cheat. It's insulting to me when you cheat, because to me, when you cheat, you're implying that one of two things. Either Gagnon is too stupid to know that I'm cheating, or too apathetic and to care. And that's insulting to me. I'm not stupid, and I do care. So please don't insult me. Just do your own work. Okay, so please don't play. Oh, one other thing. Don't use AI to do your work for you either. I think AI is here to stay, and it's a useful tool in the same way that the internet's a useful tool, in the same way Wikipedia is a useful tool, in the same way Google is a useful tool. But using AI to do your work, to me, is about the same as just Googling the questions and then cutting and pasting whatever answer Google gives you into the paper. And I'll treat it as such. I suppose the same rules would apply for the AI as would apply for using Google or Wikipedia. First of all, it's not the best source, but second of all, if you use it, you should cite it. That is, I would recommend you cite the AI the same as you would any other source. If you're taking its words directly, put them in quotes. If you're paraphrasing its words, but you're using its information, so you still make sure you have your in-text citation and your entry and references page. And I think the MLA and APA style guides now do have recommendations for how to cite AI if you use it. So I would caution you against using the AI, but if you're going to use the AI, cite it the same way you would any other source. Okay, so don't cheat, cite your sources. Okay, so that's plagiarism. Now the next thing I want to tell you is research is like plagiarism in a way, because research also involves looking up information and stealing other people's ideas and using them for your own purposes. The main difference between plagiarism and research is the citations. So if you steal somebody else's ideas and you don't give them credit, that's plagiarism. That's very bad for all the reasons I just said. But if you steal somebody else's ideas and you do give them credit, then that's considered excellent research and scholarship. So please do feel free to look things up if you have to look them up. Of course, you will have to look them up. This is an introductory course. This is a take-home exam. I expect you to look things up. It's open book, open notes. I expect you to open your book, open your notes, look things up. You're free to do research if you want. It's not really a research assignment. You should be able to answer every question on this exam using the course materials, the assigned readings, the lectures, the discussions. But you're free to do additional research as well. Just cite any sources that you use. Then you, instead of getting in trouble for plagiarizing, you'll get credit for your excellent scholarship. So just really, just cite your sources. That's the thing. Cite your sources. Like I said, it's not really a research assignment. You don't really have to do research. You should be able to answer every question on this exam using nothing but the assigned readings. I do recommend that you make the effort to cite the assigned readings. One of the things that separates the A's and B's from the lower grades is the students who get the good grades make the effort to do the assigned readings and include citations of the assigned readings. So please, it's open book. So go ahead and open your book and cite it so that I know that you did. Reading is like cheating. The answers are in the text. Okay, so cite any sources you use. I recommend that you at least cite the assigned reading. Don't cheat. Okay, so, and a proper citation does include not only a citation in the references page or bibliography or works cited page, but also a corresponding in-text citation in the form of a signal phrase or a parenthetical citation or something like that. If you're using somebody else's words, put them in quotes. If you're looking at a source, have that in-text citation and an entry in your bibliography. Okay, so cite your sources, cite your sources. Okay, so now your completed exam then is going to include a heading. It's going to include a heading or cover page, 3 1 to 2 page essays, and a works cited page or bibliography or references page. I'm not too fussy about what kind of academic style you use, but use an academically appropriate style and follow the style guide. So you could do MLA style, APA style. I actually really like Chicago style footnotes if you know how to use those, but as long as you're using an academically appropriate style, I'm not too fussy about which one you use. Use the one you're most comfortable with or the one that best corresponds to your intended academic major when you get to university. So follow the style guide. You might have to modify the style guide slightly. So, I think APA style calls for like an abstract. Obviously, you wouldn't use an abstract for an exam. Also, I kind of recommend that you write out the questions and maybe put them in like a bold font or something like that. And so you might have to make some sort of subtle modifications to the style. But generally, use the font and the margins and the spacing and the citations and the heading and the works cited page or the kind of that they recommend in the style guide. So just follow your style guide. Let's see. Okay. Heading or cover page, 3 1 to 2 page essays, works cited page or bibliography or references page. Okay, now, next thing. Exams should be submitted online via Blackboard by the end of the day, October 6th. So you have 2 weeks to work on this. I'm aware whenever I give students 2 weeks to work on something, what I'm really doing is giving them like 12 or 13 days to worry about it and procrastinate and 1 or 2 days to actually do it. You would have probably been better off if I just made the thing due tomorrow, so you just get it over with. But the reason I'm giving you this much time is because I think it will take you some time, and I kind of recommend that you pace yourselves. My guess is that this assignment will take you in the neighborhood of 6 hours. Some of you might need a little less time than that. Some of you might need a little more, but I would plan on spending about 5 or 6 hours on this, and I would really recommend you not do it all in one sitting. So you have to write 3 1 to 2 page essays. What I would recommend you do is write 1 essay per sitting. And so take an hour or 2 and write one of your essays, take a break. Take an hour or 2 and write the second essay, take a break. Take an hour or 2 and write the third essay, take a break. And then spend another hour or 2 proofreading and revising the entire document. Please don't submit any assignments to me that you haven't proofread and revised. You'd be shocked at the number of students who submit essays to me that they've evidently not even proofread once because they have very obvious sort of typographical and grammar mistakes that you would have caught had you even bothered to read through the draft one time. This is good advice, just not only for my class, but for life. Like, don't ever send an email that you haven't proofread. Don't ever submit any, don't ever send out a tweet that you haven't proofread. Don't ever send a text message that you haven't proofread. A lot of mistakes and errors and miscommunications can be avoided by the simple process of proofreading your words before you send them off. But especially with like academic work, scholarly work, or like writing that you're doing in the workplace, be sure that you're proofreading your documents and your emails before you're sending them. Really, like, especially when you're doing like written work like this, like you're writing essays, a major part of the writing process is the process of revision. Getting words on the page is just the first step. You should spend almost as much time revising the words that you put on the page as you did putting words on the page in the first place. So please allow yourself some time to proofread and revise. Okay, so again, I think about 6 hours, 1 or 2 hours for each essay and another hour or 2 for proofreading and revision. Don't try to do it all in one sitting. Okay, I'm going to have you submit these online via Blackboard. You'll have sort of just a safe assign link, so you'll upload it the same as you would for any other online writing class. And I'll use the plagiarism checker and safe assign, and I'll so on and so forth. So submit. There will be a link in Blackboard to upload the completed exams. Please put those exams in Microsoft Word document or PDF format so I can read them. don't send me a Google Docs or whatever it is that Macintosh has. Microsoft Word document or PDF format. That way I can read them. If I can't read them, I just give you 0 on it. I had a cousin once. He told me that the oldest trick in the book is to submit your assignment in an unreadable format and then buy yourself some extra time to submit the assignment later. Don't do that. Come on. Just submit it on time in a format I can read. Don't test my patience. If you're lucky, maybe I'll take the late work with a penalty. But I reserve the right to give you 0 on anything you turn in late. So just turn it in on time in a format I can read. Okay, let's see. Okay, so that's the directions. Now I thought I'd just take a minute and kind of go through each of these prompts and talk just a little bit about them for the purposes of review. Okay, so question 1 asks you to summarize Plato's allegory of the cave and analyze the symbolism in the story. So the allegory of the cave, we did this in lesson 1. You can go back and watch that video again. I think here, technically you should learn how to cite Plato's dialogues, but that's a big ask for a class of this level. I think if you just cite the YouTube video correctly, that'll be good enough for this question. When you're summarizing Plato's allegory of the cave, make sure that you are minding the details. So I really emphasized, for example, that the freed prisoner didn't wander out of the cave. He didn't escape the cave. He didn't flee the cave. He was dragged reluctantly from the cave. He was compelled to stand and dragged up the steep and rugged ascent out of the cave unwillingly. So that detail, that the prisoner had to be forced out of the cave against his will, is important. Also, it's kind of a story in 3 parts. So there's the scene that Plato describes in the cave in the beginning. There's the rising action where the prisoner is dragged out into the light and explores the world of light. And then there's sort of the resolution where the prisoner returns to the cave to tell his former companions about what he's seen, and they laugh at him and ridicule him. So make sure that you're including the entire story in your summary, like all 3 parts. Mind the details. Usually, if your summary of the allegory of the cave is sufficiently detailed, this will end up being one of the longer essays on the exam, so I'll warn you about that. Okay, so that's part A. Summarize the story in a few paragraphs. Part B, analyze the symbolism. So on part A of these questions, I'm really just testing your memory and understanding of the material. That is, you're either going to get it right or you're going to get it wrong based on whether or not you remembered and understood what we covered during the lessons. Part B, I'm asking you to do some sort of critical and independent thinking about the material. I'm asking you to do some kind of like self-reflection or application or analysis or evaluation or criticism. And so that is the area where I'm asking you to think critically and independently for yourself about the course material, which means that although there may be better and worse answers, there's not one single correct answer. There's more than one way to be successful on part B of these questions. Here I'm looking for I'm looking for critical thinking, not just sort of one correct answer. Do make sure that you're answering both parts of the question. One mistake that I see a lot on these exams is that students do a very good job on part A and a very poor job on part B, or a very good job on part B and a very poor job on part A. Make sure you're answering both parts of the questions completely. You should have at least a paragraph for part A of these questions and at least a paragraph for part B of these questions, if not more. As far as how to analyze the symbolism of the allegory of the cave, there's a number of ways you might do this successfully. So, for example, you could give the kind of analysis we gave in class, where I told you, it's a story about education. The freed prisoners are sort of the uneducated, the prisoners are sort of the uneducated, unenlightened, ignorant masses, and the shadows are the opinions of the uneducated masses, and the puppeteers are the opinion makers, and the freed prisoner is somebody who's being educated or who's or being enlightened. And the sun represents knowledge, and the darkness represents ignorance. And there's this symbol of ascending and rising up, and okay, so on and so forth. That's one way of talking about the story. You could also, if you really want to go for the gold, this might require a little bit of research because we didn't cover it in class, but you could talk about what Plato was talking about, something called the divided line and the theory of forms or the theory of ideas. If you do talk about that, make sure you include your sources because that's not necessarily common knowledge. There's also kind of like a two worlds interpretation you could give. And so there's the world inside the cave, which is the world of illusion, the world as it seems to be. And then there's the world outside the cave, which is the world of reality, the world as it really is. And you could talk about that. It's so, in a way, if you think about it, the allegory of the cave is, if you've ever heard a story where there's a distinction between the world as it is and the world as it seems to be, it's thematically similar to the allegory of the cave. So here are some examples. The Matrix, right? The world inside the cave is the world inside the Matrix, and then the freed prisoner is Neo taking the red pill and seeing the world as it really is for the first time. Or maybe the Truman Show. Truman lives on this movie set, which he believes to be real because that's all he's ever known, until one day he escapes from the movie set and realizes there's a world beyond the illusion. There's all kinds of stories like this. There's a movie called Inception. There's a movie called Total Recall. I think the Giver has similar kinds of themes. One of my students pointed out to me that the Barbie movie has a similar kind of theme because Barbie lives in her Barbie world, which is like the cave, and then she leaves Barbie world and sees the world as it really is. And so, okay, so there's these two worlds, the world of illusion and the real world, the world as it seems to be and the world as it really is. And so you could give that kind of analysis. A number of things you could do here. I had a student once who didn't actually analyze the symbolism. She did something a little bit different. She did kind of a self-reflection where she talked about her experience as a non-traditional student. So she had served in the Navy, and she had finished her term in the Navy and retired from the Navy, and then was using the GI Bill to go back to school. And she felt like a fish out of water. Because here she was a grown woman who had had all this life experience in the Navy, and she was in this university environment surrounded by teenagers who she was unable to relate to. And, you know, in the Navy, she knew what was expected of her. She knew what her job was. She knew how she was supposed to dress. She knew where she was supposed to be. And going back to school, she didn't really know what to do or how to behave, or it was all new and unfamiliar to her, and it was scary. And so she really related to this prisoner's experience of leaving the familiar world that he was comfortable with and entering a new and unfamiliar world. And so this experience of being dragged out of your comfort zone was one that she was able to connect to. And she wrote an essay about that. Not exactly what I was looking for, but she was thinking critically, independently, in a way that showed that she was paying attention to the material, and she got a very good grade. And so do feel free to be creative and do your own thinking on these questions. Okay, so that's number one. Let's see. Number two asks you to define and describe philosophy. There was a lecture, What is Philosophy, on Blackboard. In that lecture, I told you that, look, philosophy is about what's real, what's true, what's good, and how you know. It's a discipline that asks and tries to answer fundamental questions. So you could include that. You could include a dictionary definition. Just make sure that you cite it. You might include the etymology, and so I told you that philos means love, and Sophia means wisdom, and so philosophy is the love of wisdom. You might include the different branches of philosophy. So you could say, like, look, there's metaphysics and ontology, which are concerned with what's real. There's epistemology, which is concerned with what knowledge is and whether or not knowledge is possible and how we know things. There's logic, which is the branch of philosophy that's concerned with what's true. It's the study of the principles used in reasoning. It's our method in philosophy. And then there's sort of axiology and theory of value. So there's like aesthetics, which is about what's beautiful. And then, of course, there's the subject of this class, which is ethics, which is about what's good in the moral sense. Like what is the right thing to do? What is a good life? How should people live? Okay, so that's philosophy. What's real, what's true, what's good, and how you know. I've also asked you to describe philosophy. And so you might say something about our method. So we don't use scientific method. That's a different discipline. That would be like chemistry or physics or astronomy or geology or something. And instead, we use a rational method. That is, what we do is we sit down and we reason together. We use arguments. Also, the method is adversarial. You remember in the lecture I kind of compared the philosophical ideal to the judicial ideal. So just as in a court of law, you have both a prosecution and a defense. In philosophy, you want to hear arguments from opposing views. So you can mention things like that. Philosophers discuss and debate and argue about fundamental questions about what's real and what's true and what's good. Okay, so that's philosophy. Are you philosophical? Why or why not? And so, well, okay, I mean, are you curious? Are you skeptical? Do you want to know what's real and what's true and what's good? Are you a rational person? Do you like to argue? Are you interested in discovering what's true and what's good and living in accordance with the conclusions of philosophical reflections? I gave you this handout, this great Louis Poyman document on the 10 Commandments of Philosophy. Look at those. That'll be really helpful to you here. And so, for example, one of Louis Poyman's commandments is to doubt every claim you encounter until the evidence convinces you of its truth. So you want to kind of be a moderate skeptic who's suspicious of people who claim to have the truth. Well, are you that kind of person? Are you a person who refuses to believe things on insufficient evidence? Or are you just kind of like a credulous rube who just kind of like accepts things at face value and believes whatever you're told and tries not to think too much about it? That's the kind of question I'm asking you here. Another thing is like philosophers are interested in what's true. So first of all, philosophers tend to be honest, maybe too honest. But second of all, philosophers believe that there's such a thing as the truth. And so first of all, do you believe that there's such a thing as the truth? And second of all, are you interested in the truth? Do you value the truth? Is it something you pursue? And so that's the question. Okay. Are you philosophical? Explain. You can, in order to be successful in this question, you don't have to be philosophical, but you do have to understand what it is to be philosophical. Another thing is here on questions 2, 3, and 4, I'm asking you, are you philosophical? Are you ethical? Would Socrates admire your lifestyle? I'm asking you to do self-reflection. In order to answer these questions successfully, you're going to have to tell me something about yourself. You'd be surprised how many people try to answer self-reflection questions without telling me anything about themselves. This is especially common to people who use the AI. The AI tends to be very bad at self-reflection. By the time I'm done reading your answers to questions 2B, 3B, or 4B, I should know more about you than I did when I began. Also, remember, you hopefully learned this from your English teachers, it's better to show than to tell. So don't just tell me that you're skeptical and you question authority. Give me an example of a time that demonstrated that kind of skeptical, courageous attitude. So tell me about the time that your middle school history teacher made a claim that you found to be dubious, and so you went to the library and you did your research and you investigated and you found the answer and you followed up with that professor about it, and you tell me, you know what I mean, show me. Tell me something specific about yourself that illustrates how you are or are not philosophical. Okay, so that's that. All right, so that's number 2. Go back and watch the What is Philosophy lecture. Look at the 10 Commandments of Philosophy handout if you're answering that one. Question 3 says define and describe ethics. Read the introduction to the fundamentals of ethics. The answer to this question is in there. What Russ Schaefer Landau says in the introduction is that ethics is moral philosophy. It's the branch of philosophy that's concerned with what's good in the moral sense, how people should live, what's the right thing to do. I would sort of subdivide ethics into theoretical ethics. So this is questions about morality as such, and applied ethics or practical ethics or moral problems. These are sort of specific moral questions. And so they call this applied ethics because you're supposed to apply your theoretical understanding about morality to particular moral questions. But you could call this practical ethics or moral problems if you want. And so issues of practical ethics are things like abortion, euthanasia, immigration, physician-assisted suicide, capital punishment, gun control, drug criminalization or legalization, healthcare ethics, business ethics, media ethics, things like that. The ethics of war and peace, whether or not wars are ever morally justified. We talk about those kinds of questions in practical ethics or applied ethics. Okay, But then there's also theoretical ethics, and the textbook explains that really you can divide theoretical ethics into value theory. So, like, what is ultimately valuable? That is morality about pursuing pleasure or pursuing happiness? Is happiness the only thing that matters, or is there something other than happiness that we value? So that's value theory. And then a lot of ethics is what's called normative ethics, and so this is about what the rules are, what the norms are. The question of normative ethics is what is the right thing to do. So should we obey God? Should we act according to the norms of our culture? Should we try to sort of maximize the overall happiness or promote the general welfare? Is there a social contract? These are questions of normative ethics. And then there's something called meta-ethics, which is especially interesting to me. So this is sort of questions about the nature of morality as such, like overarching questions like, is there an objective or universal moral standard that applies to all people, regardless of what they believe, or is morality somehow kind of relative or subjective? That's a question of metaethics. Or is moral knowledge possible? Is a kind of a question of metaethics. Okay, that's your kind of definition of ethics. Again, check the introduction to the textbook; it will help you here. Are you ethical? Explain. This is probably the hardest question on the exam, honestly. The question I'm asking here is, are you a good person? If you think that you are, I would caution you to think again. Um, I mean, maybe you are, but usually people who think they're good people, I think, hey, you're just naive. Um, but okay, anyway, that's you can think about that one. Okay. Question 4. I've included, although I don't spend much time on Socrates in this class. So if you're going to do question 4, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of research. I do mention Socrates in that What is Philosophy lecture, so you could go back and look at that. Um, but this is something I spend more time on in my CV classes, honestly. But look, Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher. He's the principal speaker in Plato's dialogues. He was one of the first investigators of ethics in the Western tradition. And most importantly, he was tried and executed by the city-state of Athens for the crimes of denying the gods and corrupting the youth of Athens. So he's a martyr for philosophy. He was killed for his unwillingness to bite his tongue and stop the practice and teaching of philosophy. Um, so that's the most important thing. If you're going to write this essay, make sure you at least include that. I have a lot of students who decide to answer this question about Socrates and forget to mention, excuse me, excuse me, I'm sorry. They forget to mention this whole business about his trial and death. That would be like writing an essay about Babe Ruth and forgetting to mention the thing about baseball or the home runs. It's kind of the key point about Socrates. Um, also, you can talk about like Socratic method. So Socratic method is a method of teaching that involves like asking a lot of questions and engaging students in dialogue and interrogating people about what they believe and why they believe it. And so Socrates liked to interrogate people about what they believe and why they believed it. He thought doing this could improve their soul. It could make them more rational and more virtuous. Um, and and he was killed because he refused to stop interrogating people in this way. So that's who Socrates was. Would Socrates admire lifestyle? Well, so the most famous thing that Socrates ever said is in Plato's Apology. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living, that there is no greater good than to converse daily about virtue, and the unexamined life is no life for a human being to live. And so would Socrates admire lifestyle? The question here is really, are you living an examined life? Are you um, so you have a worldview that consists of all the things you believe about the world. Are you endeavoring to improve that worldview? Are you examining those things that you believe to see whether or not they're true? Are you proportioning your beliefs to the evidence? Are you thinking critically about what you believe and and how you live? Are you trying to improve your life? Are you trying to be a better person? For Socrates, the examined life is a life spent in pursuit of what's true and what's good. And so are you interested in what's true and what's good? Are you trying to find what's true and what's good? And are you trying to live in accordance with it? That's the question. Are you living an examined life? Really, if you think about it, the question 2b, are you philosophical? And 3b, are you ethical? And 4b, would Socrates admire your lifestyle? Are basically the same question. Okay, so that's question 4. Let's see. Question 5, define and describe moral skepticism. So be careful here. So moral skepticism, according to sort of the internet, is an attitude of doubt about morality. So a moral skeptic is somebody who doubts that we can know which moral claims are true and which moral claims are false. But our textbook author gives kind of a technical definition, which I employed in the lecture. And so if you're going to answer this question on the exam and you want to show that you've paid attention to the course material, you should be aware that Russ Schaefer Landau in our course material defines moral skepticism as the denial of objective moral standards. And so objective moral standards are moral rules that are true for all people, whether they believe them or not. And the moral skeptic denies that there are any such standards. So moral skeptics think that either there is no such thing as a true moral claim or a false moral claim, or that it's impossible to know which moral claims are true and which moral claims are false. That's moral skepticism. Are you a moral skeptic? Why or why not? In the textbook, in the introduction to the textbook, The Fundamentals of Ethics, there's a good discussion of moral skepticism. You should look at it. There's also a chapter about moral skepticism that I didn't assign, but you could look at that as well. Also, I did a lecture on moral skepticism. I would encourage you to go back and review that. In that lecture, I reviewed the 2 most common arguments that I see for moral skepticism. One of those I called the differences of opinion argument, and the other I called the provability argument. And so some people will say, well, look, people disagree about moral claims and therefore there can't be an objective moral standard. I don't think that's a valid argument. I mean, people disagree about geographical claims and historical claims and medical claims, but we don't therefore conclude that there can't be an objective history or geography or medicine. So why should our disagreement about morality be proof that there isn't an objective morality? The provability argument is a little more complicated. There's this idea, well, moral claims are like, they're not facts that you can prove, like geography, medicine, and history. Instead, they're sort of mere matters of opinion that you cannot prove. That's a little bit better argument for moral skepticism. I have my doubts about that one too, but you can go back and watch the lecture. Okay, so that's moral skepticism. All right, number 6, define and describe ethical relativism. This is one of my favorite questions, actually. This is a topic that's really interesting to me. If you're going to talk about ethical relativism, make sure that you've read the relevant readings. Start with chapter 19 of the Fundamentals of Ethics. That's most important. You'll get Russ Schaefer Landau's take on ethical relativism. There's also several readings in the Ethical Life textbook. I think I required the J.L. Mackey reading on the subjectivity of values and the David Enoch reading, why I'm an objectivist about ethics and you are too. I'd recommend you look at all those. But basically, ethical relativism is the idea that there's not an objective moral standard that's true for everybody. Instead, morality is sort of relative. So what's true for me about morality might not be true for you about morality. It could be either relative to the individual, that is, it could be subjective, in which case, if ethics is subjective, each individual has his or her own moral code that's valid only for him or her. Or, more commonly, it could be relative to cultures or societies, in which case each culture or each society has its own moral code that is correct only for members of that culture or society. And I really recommend you focus on cultural relativism because that's what we focused on in class. And it's a theory, it's a view of morality that I would say was the dominant view of morality in the social sciences through most of the 20th century. So what the cultural relativist thinks is that really morality is nothing but a system of norms and customs and traditions that vary from society to society. And so each society has its own sorts of traditional behavior or norms of behavior or customs that have evolved in sort of the social, cultural, political, geographical context of that culture and are correct for the members of that culture. That's roughly the view. Okay, so that's cultural relativism. So, like, for example, some cultures are monogamous and say a man can only have one wife. Other cultures are polygamous and say a man can have as many wives as he wants. And the cultural relativist view is whether or not I'm allowed to have more than one wife depends on whether or not I'm in a monogamous or polygamous culture. And so the moral rules of my culture are the moral rules that apply to me. That's the idea. Do you find the theory plausible? Why or why not? Well, look, I think in favor of ethical relativism, you're going to want to say that, as a matter of fact, it is true that different cultures do have different moral codes. Morals do, in fact, vary from culture to culture. And most of us are the product of our environment, the product of our society, the product of the culture in which we were raised. There's this great quote from Herodotus that if one were to offer men to choose out of all the customs of the world, such as seemed to them best, they would examine the whole number and end by preferring their own. And so I think that there is something to the idea that, most of what we believe, most of our moral convictions are really just things that we were taught to believe by our culture and our society. We believe what we believe mostly because we were raised to believe it, not for any good reason. And that morals do in fact vary from society to society, and that's kind of the cultural relativist perspective. However, you should be aware, if you're answering this question, that people in my discipline believe, most of us, that this theory has very severe practical and theoretical problems, and I made great effort to make you aware of those problems in the course material. And if you're going to answer this question, you should at least demonstrate some awareness of those problems. Whether or not you agree that those problems are decisive against the theory is for you to decide, but if you appear to be completely ignorant of those problems, I'll think that you haven't done the work. So those problems are as follows. First of all, you have to decide, if I'm supposed to act according to the norms of my culture, you're going to have to decide what counts as a culture and what the norms of your culture are. That's not easy. Second of all, the fact that morals vary from culture to culture doesn't actually prove that different cultures have different moral code, or the fact that morals vary from Second of all, the fact that morals vary from culture to culture doesn't actually prove that there's no objective cross-cultural moral standard. It's entirely possible that some cultures are right and other cultures are wrong. That's not a valid argument. But if you think that our differences are evidence against moral objectivity, then you also have to contend with the fact that there are similarities. Every culture says that you can't kill the innocent, that you should be honest, that you should be humble, and that you should take care of your children. And so the fact that those rules are universal or exist across cultures, if the differences between cultures is evidence against moral objectivity and ethics, then shouldn't similarities across cultures be evidence of objectivity and ethics? Okay, so cultures share values in common. It's not even obvious what a culture is. The inference from moral variance to ethical relativism is invalid. Another problem for ethical relativism is that typically the ethical relativist is motivated by this attitude of tolerance and non-judgment, but their theory actually doesn't advise us to be tolerant and non-judgmental. It advises us to do whatever is normal in our culture. So according to their theory, whether or not I should be tolerant depends on whether or not I live in a tolerant culture. If I live in an intolerant culture, then I should be intolerant. If I live in a tolerant culture, then I should be tolerant. And so the ethical relativist has this weird tendency to want to treat tolerance as an objective value while simultaneously denying objective values. Also, ethical relativism implies that we can't blame other cultures, even for things like female genital mutilation and honor killing. But of course, we can blame those cultures for those things. Ethical relativism also implies that we can't praise other cultures, even in ways in which they're a lot better. So, for example, like a lot of indigenous peoples have much better sort of ecological sensibilities than a lot of modern Westerners. But ethical relativists can't say that because according to ethical relativism, cross-cultural ethics is impossible because there's no standard independent of culture by which we could judge. Also, it makes nonsense of moral progress because the whole idea of moral progress implies that there's some objective moral standard that we're getting closer to. And so it's very difficult for the ethical relativist to explain, for example, why the abolition of slavery was an improvement, or why giving women the vote was an improvement, or why outlawing segregation was an improvement. We all understand that our society is much better because we outlawed segregation and we gave women the vote and we outlawed slavery. That is, there's some objective standard of right and wrong that our society is closer to now than it was 100 or 200 years ago. But it's very hard to see how the ethical relativists could say that. It seems like the best they could say is, well, this is what we do now, and that's what they did then, but there's no way that we can measure now against then. Okay, so I think ethical relativism is highly implausible. Most people in my discipline do. Please feel free to disagree with me, but do so in a way that shows you're actually aware of the relevant issues. All right, number 7 is about the divine command theory. This is the because God says so theory of morality. And so, if you're going to tackle question 7, chapter 5 of the Fundamentals of Ethics on morality and religion, you should read that. Also, in the ethical life, or like really on the internet, you can find Plato's Euthyphro. You should definitely read Plato's Euthyphro if you're going to talk about the divine command theory. If you don't know about Plato's Euthyphro, you don't know the first thing about the divine command theory. So make sure you've read that if you're interested in question 7. But anyway, the divine command theory is just the theory that morality is about obedience to God. There's really just one rule: do what God says. And so stealing and killing and lying are wrong because God commands us not to do them. You have an obligation, or you have a right to property and a right to life because God gave you those rights. And so your rights are God-given, and your obligations are imposed on you by God. So the divine command theorist's view is that morality is law-like in its operations because there is a moral lawgiver, God. And so God is the giver of the moral law. Morality is about obedience to God. Okay, so killing is wrong because God says thou shalt not kill, and charity is good because God says give to any man who asks, that kind of thing. Okay, do you find the theory plausible? Why or why not? Well, the divine command theory is nice because it does provide a neat solution to the problem of objectivity in ethics. That is, it does make the source of our rights, or the foundation of our rights, the most high authority. And so if you think about like Jefferson and declaring independence from Great Britain and saying that it's self-evident that we have inalienable God-given rights, that we're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. This is one of the advantages of the divine command theory, is it gives your rights this sort of solid foundation. Your rights were given to you by God, the most high authority, and no secular authority can take them away. Okay, so it solves the problem of objectivity in ethics, also solves the problem of moral motivation. That is, it gives us kind of, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. People who fear God are more trustworthy because, they think that they're being watched and they will be judged and they will be punished. In the same kind of way that like children who fear that Santa Claus won't bring them any presents might behave better. So there's that. Also, like some people use their religion as a source of moral courage and moral inspiration. And okay, so those are some powerful arguments in favor of the divine command theory. But ultimately, most professional ethicists think that the divine command theory fails because of something called the Euthyphro problem. And so famously, Socrates asks Euthyphro whether or not right conduct is good because it is commanded by God, which is the divine command theory, or whether or not right conduct is commanded by God because it is good, which suggests that if right conduct is commanded by God because it's good, it suggests that something other than God's command made that conduct good. And so the philosopher Anthony Flew says one good test of a person's aptitude for philosophy is whether or not he can grasp the force and the point of this question. And so I am testing your aptitude for philosophy here. And so if you're going to talk about the divine command theory, you better at least address the Euthyphro dilemma. Basically, what Socrates is asking Euthyphro is this: does God have reasons for giving the commands that he does? If you say that he doesn't, then that makes God's commands sort of morally arbitrary. And if you say that he does, then those reasons, rather than God say so, must be the source of morality. Okay, that's the divine command theory. Question 8 is about ethical egoism. Egoism is selfishness or self-interest. It's the opposite of altruism, which is sort of putting others first or considering others. And the ethical egoist thinks that the right thing, there's really only one moral rule, that's look out for number one. So my only moral obligation is to myself. I should always do what is in my own best interest. That's what the ethical egoist thinks. Be careful not to confuse ethical egoism with psychological egoism. And so psychological egoism is a theory of human nature that says that people really just are naturally selfish, that people always do act in their own perceived best interest. Ethical egoism is a moral theory which says that people should be selfish, that the right thing to do, your only moral obligation is to act in your own best interest. So be careful about that distinction. Make sure that you have read, I think it's chapter 7 and 8 of the Fundamentals of Ethics, the one about psychological egoism and the one about ethical egoism. Um, yeah, but really, okay, so do you find the theory plausible? Do you think it's plausible to say that morality is all about acting in your own best interest? Most people think not. I mean, common sense kind of tells us that morality is about balancing our own interest against the interest of others. But the egoist kind of thinks that's just sort of a naive platitude. Um, that is really, if you think about it, well, I mean, why shouldn't you kill people, steal from people and lie to people? Well, because then people won't trust you and you'll get in a lot of trouble. It's really not in your best interest to misbehave because your misbehavior has negative consequences for you. And there's something to that. Um, So, I mean, I think the ethical egoist maybe has kind of a cynical understanding of human nature and thinks that, look, the only real way to keep us from killing each other is to make it against our own interest, to set up a society where people get in trouble if they hurt each other. So we're not going. I'm not going to kill you in exchange for your agreement not to kill me, and we're going to have a system of laws um, and justice that punishes you if you break that contract. And so, really, I agree to not to kill you in exchange for your agreement not to kill me. It's in my own best interest that we not kill each other. And this is the way the ethical egoist thinks. And like maybe that's a cynical view of human nature, but maybe it's realistic. And maybe the sort of altruist is just kind of naive and optimistic. Um, but on the other hand, like egoism seriously undermines common sense morality. Like, common sense tells me that giving to charity is a good thing, even if I don't get any benefit out of it. And it's very difficult for the egoist to explain how that is. Or, classic example, imagine the soldier who lays down his life in order to save the members of his platoon, or the mother who lays down her life in order to save her children. She has acted not in her own interest, but in the interest of others. Or he has acted not in his own interest, but in the interest of others. And typically we regard that kind of heroic self-sacrifice as sort of the, a great moral good, above and beyond the call of duty, what we call a supererogatory act. It's very hard to see how the egoist would explain our intuition of the goodness of that kind of self-sacrifice. And so that's a problem for egoism. Anyway, like I said, read the chapter 7 and 8 of the textbook if you're going to tackle question 8. I also have some notes on Blackboard, a bunch of syllogisms, arguments for and against egoism that might help you. Okay, that's it. I think by now I've told you all the answers. I've told you everything I can think of about how to be successful in the exam. I've answered every question I ever get. So hopefully that was helpful to you. Hopefully it was beneficial to you. Do the exam, get it done. This should be your highest priority in class between now and when it's due. It is 25% of your grade. Once you've submitted the exam, I'll get it graded, and you'll really have a good idea of where you stand in the course heading into a fall break. And we'll get back to working on the research papers after fall break. But for now, when you're working in this course, put your time and effort into this. This should be your highest priority. Again, I hope that helps. If you have more questions, please feel free to contact me. Please email me. And thank you very much.